The first sound was iron raw, deliberate, dragging across old wood. Then came the scent, sweat, hey, something fouler beneath it. I was already barefoot and bleeding when they pushed me through the barn doors. Sheriff King didn't even look me in the eye. He just nodded at the man behind him, and the chain around my wrists was pulled tight and locked around the center post like I was no more than a mule in need of tethering. "You call that payment?" King growled, spitting near my feet. "Taxes." "Do, girl, and your brother's too dead to pay it." He turned on his boot heel, laughing with the two deputies as they stomped off into the night. Their boots left wet, muddy tracks in the straw. I listened as the barn doors creaked shut, then held my breath. Somewhere behind me, a horse stirred. I didn't cry. I'd done all the crying earlier. Now I just stared at the gaps between the planks, counting stars and waiting to die. I must have drifted off, or maybe I just got numb. Because when I heard the match strike, it was like waking underwater. A figure tall, broad-shouldered, stood in the doorway, cupping a flicker of flame in his hands. The light hit his jawline first, rough stubble, a long-healed scar just under the cheek. His eyes didn't blink when they landed on me. "You with the sheriff?" I whispered, throat cracked from thirst. He didn't answer, just walked toward me, slow and careful. He crouched down beside the iron ring, studying the lock, then the bolt wedged in the beam. Still no words. Then, with a sudden flick, he pinched out the match. Darkness swallowed us. Both outside I could hear them King's men, laughing around a campfire. One said something about sunrise. Another joked about bringing eggs for the hanging. My breath caught in my throat. I felt movement beside me again, and a sound metal on metal. A file, he was working the bolt, in the dark, with sparks flaring like tiny stars in the hay. "You'll burn us both," I hissed. He didn't stop, didn't speak. Time twisted itself in knots. Each scrape of the file felt like thunder in my ears. The chain around my wrists bit deeper with every shift. I was shaking by the time the shackle clicked loose and dropped to the ground with a soft clink. He moved fast, then pulling me up, throwing an old poncho around my shoulders, guiding me toward the loft ladder. I balked at first. What if it was a trap? What if he was just another devil with a different badge? Then he looked at me. A flicker of lightning flashed through a crack in the boards, just enough to catch his expression. Not anger, not hunger, something steadier, like wind before a storm. We climbed. The thunderstorm had just begun to roll in as we dropped from the loft window into wet soil. He moved like he knew every inch of this land. I stumbled after him, boots slung over his shoulder, one of them finally tossed to me mid-run. When we reached his horse stall, black eyes like coal, he didn't ask. Just mounted and reached down. I hesitated only for a second. "Ride," he said, that voice low, gritty, final, and so I did. We didn't speak as the wind howled around us, and the rain came down in sharp needles. Trees blurred. My fingers clung to the saddle horn like it was the last solid thing on earth. Behind us, the barn loomed smaller and smaller until a sudden burst of orange and gold lit up the horizon. I turned, flames licked through the slats. Black smoke clawed at the clouds. He didn't look back, I did. Not because I mourned it, but because I needed to see it burn. That barn had been my coffin, and he'd struck the match. I pressed my hand to the ache on my wrist. The skin was raw, but the bone was free. The nameless man kept riding. I leaned in closer to his back, felt the warmth radiating off him, smelled the mix of rain, sweat, and horses. I didn't know who he was, didn't know where he was leading me, but I knew one thing. I owed him my life, and I'd repay him or die trying. Water sluiced off the sandstone bluffs and spilled onto the trail so suddenly it looked like the earth had been cut open. One moment the sky only grumbled. The next it ripped apart with a roar, turning the wash into a snarling, copper-colored river. Our horse lost its footing, chest deep in the torrent, nostrils flaring. The rancher swung down, reins in one hand, my waist in the other, yanking me clear of the saddle as a dead mesquite trunk barreled past. Out of the chaos his wide-brim hat tore free and careened downstream like a dark leaf. Instinct over terror. I lunged, fingers brushing current, catching the brim by a stitch, and almost went under with it. He caught my collar, hauled me against him, and planted us on a rocky ledge as the flash flood raged below. The posse's hoofbeats faded, cut. Off on the far bank, we were soaked, trembling, breathing the same shock. He took the hat from my grip, shook the water out, then gave a single grunt that landed somewhere between thanks and surprise. When the storm crawled east and dusk pressed in, we found half shelter beneath an overhang. He coaxed the reluctant flame from damp tinder and set jerky strips beside it to warm. Smoke drifted in slow blue ribbons. The canyon smelled of sage after rain. I watched him tilt his head to the sky, reading the clouds like scripture, then reach into a leather pouch for a sliver of cedar. With a small knife he coaxed a horse from the wood, patient curls falling onto his boots. He set the carving on my knee, no flourish, no words, just a quiet offering. I tried flexing the hand he'd freed. The iron had rubbed skin raw, leaving a purple welt that still wept. He noticed. From his saddlebag he drew a cotton strip, motioned for my arm, and wrapped the wound with the same care he gave the fire. We pushed on at dawn, ghosts in a world rinsed clean. By midday we crossed a ridge into a town too dead for even vultures. Blown-out windows, a saloon sign hanging by one nail, hoof-prints long erased by wind. I followed him down the boardwalk, boots echoing in the silence. Shame rode harder than fear. Every doorway reminded me why I'd been chained, that my brother's gambling debt, my refusal to repay it with flesh, had marked me as property. I told the story aloud for the first time, words tasting like dust. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he unscrewed his canteen and offered it. I drank, water running down my chin, and realized it was kindness I couldn't repay yet. I asked his name. He only shrugged, gaze pinned on the horizon as if the syllables didn't matter. Crows lifted suddenly from the roof of the livery. I felt it a heartbeat before he did, the thrum of hooves beyond town. 6 riders burst into the main street, rifles up, Sheriff King's star glinting on their chests. We dove behind the buckshot, riddled walls of the telegraph office. Splinters exploded around the window frame as lead ripped through. The rancher slid his rifle across the floor to me, checked the cylinder of his own revolver, then leaned out for 2 quick shots. One deputy folded, screaming. The second wheeled his horse but caught a 3rd round square in the chest. Return. Fire cracked so close it scorched my ear. Glass rained over us. A slug carved across the rancher's upper arm, spinning him backward. Blood soaked his shirt sleeve, brilliant against the dust. Move, he rasped. We sprinted through a back door, over tumbleweed, into a maze of thorny mesquite. Bullets snapped branches overhead. Sap hissed on fresh bark. We ducked beneath the woven thicket until rifle pops faded, then crawled another mile before daring to breathe full. He slumped against a trunk, hand clamped to the bleeding groove. Moonrise washed the desert silver. I heated my pocket knife in the coals of a makeshift fire, cleaned the wound, and stitched him by that ghost light. My fingers shook, but the thread held. Sweat beaded on his brow, yet he never flinched. When it was done, he looked at the crooked line, then at me. "Call me Cain," he said, voice barely more than gravel. I tied off the last knot, thread between my teeth. "Then call me Hope," I answered, the new name tasting like a doorway we'd both just stepped through. He leaned back, eyes half shut, and for the first time I felt the hush between us fill with something sturdier than silence, an unspoken oath that whatever chased us next, we would face it side by side. We climbed onto Mesa del Toro as dawn bled over the rim like a fresh-struck vein. The air up there tasted of juniper and altitude sharp enough to wake the bones. Cain set his Spencer rifle on a sandstone slab and told me to line my shoulders. "With the horizon, not the gun." "A body wavers," he murmured, pressing my palms into position, "but the world stays still." He placed one steadying hand between my shoulder blades. The weight of it felt like a promise. The first shot kicked like a mule and knocked me half a step back. He only raised an eyebrow, laid another cartridge in my palm, and pointed to a distant yucca stalk quivering in the morning breeze. By the 6th round I could feel the tremor of steel becoming an extension of breath. Noon found us tracking a stray cattle run, long-cut hoof marks, scat still warm enough to steam. Kane knelt, brushed his fingers through the dust, then guided. Mine so I could tell fresh from stale, cow from bull, print from mirage. Each lesson was a small reclamation, one rusted link of that shackle falling away inside my mind. Dust storms bruised the sky 2 days later when we reached the red clay crossroads, the place where wagon ruts veered south toward the railroad spur. Vultures circled something by the tracks. We hurried, rifles ready, but it wasn't livestock. The birds had found. A boy no older than 17, chest bare and gashed, lay face down in the ochre mud. His dark hair was braided with bone beads, his skin sun-cracked and burning with fever. A railroad tie had been propped on his legs to keep him grounded for scavengers. Kane levered it off, then lifted the boy in both arms like he weighed less than a sack of oats. I covered them as we retreated into the brush, expecting rifle shots from the mercenaries who'd left the body. None came. Only the wind and the low caw of disappointed birds. We made camp in a box canyon hidden by tamarisk. While I brewed, willow bark for pain, the boy's eyes cracked open black as a raven's wing and fixed on Kane with a look I could not read. He spoke one word in Apache. Kane answered in the same tongue. Whatever passed between them ended in 2 solemn nods, as if an agreement older than any of us had been renewed. When I asked the boy's name, he whispered, Kohana. I offered water. He drank, but winced at every swallow. Long after night settled, Kane sat by the fire carving small spirals into a spare rifle stock. Kohana watched, then took the knife and carved a rising sun beside the spirals. Without words, something threefold sparked to life in that ember light. The next evening we huddled close, wind-rattling sage pods like distant bones. Kohana spoke halting English, enough to spill the story. Railroad mercenaries clearing tribal land for iron tracks, paid in coin and whiskey by Sheriff King himself. The same star I'd seen on the posse's chests had funded the bullets now lodged in Kohana's shoulder. While he talked, Kane rolled his left sleeve higher than I'd ever seen. Beneath scar tissue, a burned brand emerged, interlocking K's, cruel and unmistakable. His eyes never left the flames as he traced it with a thumb, the gesture equal parts confession and penance. Silence thickened until I finally understood. He once rode with King, wore the iron brand like a badge, and had lit more than barns for? The man who chained me, my stomach roiled. Trust, once so delicate, buckled under the weight of history. I walked beyond the firelight wanted distance wide enough to breathe. The desert night crackled with unseen creatures, but their danger felt simpler than the one by the hearth. Could I keep following a man shaped by the same cruelty that nearly killed me? Wind carried the faint smell of wood smoke from distant ranches. Survival, it reminded me, was never a solitary sport. I closed my eyes, pictured Kane pulling me from the flood, his pulse steady under my stitching needle, the way he called me hope as if I were something worth believing in. People flee their pasts, or they burn them down. The difference is which way the smoke drifts. I turned back to camp. Kane looked up when I entered the circle of light. Regret shadowed his expression, a brittle mask begging for judgment. We finish this, I said, voice small but sure. Crescent Gulch first light. Kohana's gaze flicked between us. Then he nodded, understanding more than language could carry. We traveled at night, sleeping in arroyos by day, 3 silhouettes against silver moonstone. At the ridge above Crescent Gulch, we belly-crawled to the lip and stared down on the sheriff's kingdom, a huddled cluster of buildings. Crude stockade at the center, and the payroll shack glinting with armored shutters. Prison wagons stood by the barn where I'd once awaited dawn. Men lounged at barrels, rifles slung loose too few, too arrogant. Kohana marked sentry paths in the dirt with a charred stick. Kane traced a second line from the payroll shack to the barn, tapping the point where oil barrels waited beneath. Awnings, I felt heat bloom in my chest at the symmetry, a barn for a barn, flame for flame. When Kane finished the map, he looked at me, offering the final decision. My pulse drummed like boots on hollow boards. I imagined chains, the stench of horse sweat, the crackle of a single match. Then I saw something else. dawn rising behind free faces, the smoke curling away in surrender. "We burned the stockade," I whispered. "We crack that payroll wide so the whole territory sees kings rot. Then we open every shackle down there, start a fire no badge can smother." Kane's smile was small, almost imperceptible, but I felt it radiate like first light over the mesa. He grasped my forearm the way soldiers seal a pact. Kohana laid his palm over both of ours, an unspoken oath forged of blood debts, scorch marks, and new names. Below us, the town slept on its cushions of stolen coin, unaware the night had already begun to turn. The moon sat low and red as we drifted into Crescent Gulch like smoke that hadn't chosen a direction yet. Kohana moved first, cat quiet along the dry creek bed, knocking a sentry cold with the knock of his bow. Kane and I slipped past the payroll. Shack oil barrels sloshing softly as he rolled them beneath the eaves of Sheriff King's barn-same rough boards. Same iron hinges, only fuller now with groans and muffled prayers. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard chains scrape straw, 6, maybe 7 souls waiting for dawn. Kane struck the match but held it pinched between thumb and forefinger, sulfur hissing like a warning. His eyes asked a question I already understood. I nodded once, stepped through a cracked side door, and the dark closed behind me. Inside smelled of fear and horse manure, memories braided tight. Lantern light spilled in lazy stripes from the loft. I spotted the captive's 2 ranch hands, a schoolmarm, a stable boy, a miner still in his black dust, and an older woman whose wrists bled fresh through the cuffs. My heart slammed, but my hands stayed steady. Kane's lessons had burned the tremor out of them. I drew the skeleton key Kohana had lifted off the unconscious guard and whispered each lock open. The woman tried to speak, but I pressed a finger to my lips. Outside, boots thudded. One by one, they followed me across the straw, pausing where Kane knelt by the barrels. The match still trembled between his fingers. The barn doors burst inward rifles. Flashed white boards splintered above our heads. Kane loosed the match. Fire raced along the oil, turning shadows to jagged gold. I shoved the freed townsfolk toward the back ramp just as King's men fired again, flame-lit bullets whining past my ear. Kohana's arrows answered, hissing down. From the hayloft windows, pinning 2 deputies to the jam before they could reload. The schoolmarm grabbed a dropped carbine and covered the exit like she'd drilled every Sunday of her life. Smoke twisted up, coughing sparks into the beams. A deputy lunged at me. I swung a broken pitchfork shaft and caught him beneath the ribs, felt the breath leave his body in a single wordless question. Then King himself appeared in the doorway, coat flaring, silver star glinting hot as the flames. "Back from the dead? Girl?" he sneered, raising a Colt to my chest. I felt nothing, no fear, only a stillness so cold it might never melt. I kicked the leg of a toppled stall gate. It swung, cracked his wrist, and the pistol skittered away. Kane's rifle barked from somewhere in the firestorm, but the shot went wide. King dragged me by the sleeve, dragged us both into the choke of smoke. My free hand found the length of chain still looped at my belt. I snapped the cuff around his right wrist and slammed the bolt through the eye of a support post. He cursed, yanking me forward. But the other shackle relic of my own captivity clicked shut around the post before he realized what I'd done. Flames licked the straw at his boots. "Abigail," he coughed, fury cracking to something thinner. "Listen to me, we can settle. I got money, railroad money. You want your brother's debts cleared? Done. You want land? Title's yours. Just get the key." I heard the barn groan overhead, timbers popping like knuckles. In the wash of firelight his face looked smaller, the badge dull. All the nights I'd prayed for blood rose up, but they felt heavy, not clean. I climbed the ladder, smoke blinding, found a crossbeam high above the stall. I balanced the iron key on that beam where heat shimmered fiercest. Then I looked down at him through the smoke. "If your men are worth the coin," I said, voice steady, "they'll reach it before the roof caves." His reply drowned in the crack of falling rafters. I dropped from the loft, rolled, and ran. Outside, the townsfolk and Kohana dragged buckets from the trough, forming a desperate line to keep the rest of the street from catching. Kane stumbled through the smoke, bleeding afresh where the stitches had torn. I caught him under the arm. Across the yard, King's deputies scattered, some to flee, some to try saving their paymaster. None crossed the threshold. Dawn bled into the sky, pale behind a plume of black that rose like prophecy. People I'd never met gripped my shoulders, shouting thanks over the roar. Somewhere a child cried, then laughed when she realized her father'd been among the freed. And in the hush that followed the barn's final collapse, voices lifted, not my name, but my deed, the woman who lit the fire. They meant the first barn. They meant this one. They meant whatever came next. Kane pulled away, vaguest smile beneath. Usut. He retrieved his hat still singed from the flood and turned toward the open desert the same way he'd come into my life. Silent. Intentional, almost storybook unreal. I caught his sleeve. A promise fulfilled doesn't erase. A debt, I said, at least let me know who I'm thanking. Morning light hit his eyes, and for the first time they softened. Daniel, he answered after a breath, as if shaping the syllables for the very first time. It fit him strangely perfect. He tipped the hat, then walked west until the rising sun swallowed his outline. I stayed because broken towns need more than avengers. They need hands that rebuild. Kohana stayed too, standing beside me amid the smolder and dawn, our shadows stretching long across ground no longer ruled by fear. I watched Daniel shrink to a dot, then to memory until only smoke scribbled the air between us. Some matches burned barns. Others light roads home. If this story sparks something in you, ride with us, hit like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for the next fire we set against the dark horizon.